The rain lashed against the windows like a whip. The golden lamp cast reflections on the streams of water trailing down the glass, glistening across the damp skin of three people facing each other in the cramped living room. The air was thick with the scent of bodies, of wine, of secrets not yet spoken. Evelyn leaned against the wall, her hair wild and tangled, breath coming fast, her eyes rimmed red, yet in their depths shone a pain mixed with a raw, desperate longing. Livia, her daughter, clutched her thin nightgown tightly around herself, lips bitten to the point of bleeding, her gaze locked onto the older man who stood with head bowed, both hands clenched and trembling as if to keep himself together. Dylan. His shirt had been torn open at some point, baring his rain-slicked chest, red scratch marks still visible on his shoulder. A man half given over to desire, half drowning in guilt. Outside, thunder rumbled endlessly, drowning out the choked sobs and the heavy, ragged breathing within the room. Evelyn let out a harsh, broken laugh, a laugh that hovered on the edge of tears, her eyes never leaving Dylan. "Tell me," she said, her voice trembling, "what do you really want from this house?" Dylan stared down at his hands, his fingers still carrying the scent of a woman's body. Suddenly, Livia rushed to him, wrapping her arms tightly around his arm from behind, her tears scalding as they slid down his bare skin. "You can't leave me. Not tonight. I don't want you to go anywhere." Evelyn stepped closer, her face torn between jealousy and longing, her voice a whisper burning against Dylan's ear. "If you cross this line, there's no turning back." Dylan closed his eyes. The three of them, their breaths entangled, hot and suffocating, as if this little house was about to explode under the weight of secrets too dangerous to name. Outside, thunder roared again, sweeping away all memory, all the way back to the first night Dylan had knocked on this door. A night when everything still wore the mask of distance and comfort, and all the boundaries were still unbroken. The late autumn sky was heavy and gray, clouds like a thick, sodden blanket pressing down on the roofs of old suburban houses. Dylan Mercer stood quietly before the rusting iron gate of number 43, his hand gripping the suitcase handle so tightly his knuckles whitened, equal parts cold and nerves. The faded paint on the door peeled back to reveal streaks of reddish rust. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his chest, as if his body already sensed he was about to step into something that would not be easy. Dylan drew a deep breath, the damp scent of earth mixing with a faint sweetness of wildflowers on the wind, a smell that brought back flashes of youth. Those days when a man still believed he could start his life over. The gate swung open with a peculiar metallic creak that echoed strangely on the quiet street. The woman before him, Evelyn Ross, had sun-kissed skin and long, wavy brown hair left loose, her deep eyes shadowed with tiredness, but shining with something that made Dylan pause for half a second. Evelyn wore a plain white t-shirt hugging a curvy, mature figure, old jeans, and bare feet. For a moment, Dylan was thrown by the way she looked at him. Not quite the gaze of a landlord, not just a woman's glance, but the look of someone who'd tasted every flavor of hardship life had to offer. "Mr. Mercer?" she asked, her voice low and husky from just waking up. "I'm Evelyn. Please come in, the rain's coming soon." Dylan nodded, dipped his head in greeting, and squeezed his suitcase through the narrow doorway. The small hallway led into a warm living room, where the morning aroma of coffee still lingered by the window pane. The house was not large, but everything was kept neat and tidy. On the bookshelf, novels and cookbooks lay stacked together, an old guitar resting carelessly beside the couch. From the stairs above came light footsteps. Livia Ross appeared, clutching a notebook to her chest, her dark hair loosely tied, a baggy t-shirt slipping off one shoulder to reveal pale, smooth skin. Her eyes widened in fleeting surprise when she saw Dylan, but in the next moment, curiosity and a spark of something playful filled her gaze. Livia flopped down onto the stairs, chin on her hand, her eyes fixed on the new man. "This is Dylan. He'll be staying upstairs for a few months," Evelyn introduced, keeping her tone as casual as possible. "Livia, say hello to our guest." "Hi, Mr. Mercer," Livia smiled, a grin both sulky and teasing. "Where are you coming from to look so tired?" Dylan replied with a nod, a wry smile on his lips. His eyes drifted around the room, taking in the small details. A photo of mother and daughter on a windswept beach, a jar of dried lavender on the windowsill, a still damp towel draped over a chair, small fragments of real, lived-in life, warm and a little lonely. Evelyn led Dylan upstairs. The guest room was small, its window opening onto a riot of blooming bougainvillea, the bed neatly made with clean sheets, the comforter folded just so. "Put your things down here. If you need anything, just ask," she said, her hand brushing the wooden door, unwittingly revealing a small scar on her wrist. Dylan watched her go, noticing how her shoulders quivered, as if she were restraining some sudden surge of emotion. He set his suitcase down, gazing out through the window, where the first fat raindrops began tapping on the tin roof. The feeling was strange, part guest, yet part of him already feeling woven into the fabric of this house. That night, their first dinner under the unfamiliar roof began with small talk, threaded through with long silences. Livia kept sneaking glances at Dylan, occasionally lobbing deliberately naive questions about his work or the city he'd just left. Evelyn focused on serving food, but every time her hand touched a spoon, her eyes seemed to drift unconsciously to Dylan's strong arms. The kitchen was cozy, the yellow light softening every shadow, the three of them, 3 different breaths, 3 private solitudes, listening to the steady drum of rain on the roof. After dinner, Dylan volunteered to wash the dishes. Hot water ran through his fingers, the scent of soap rising with the steam. Livia lingered nearby, pretending to fetch a drink, but really just watching every move he made. When Dylan turned unexpectedly, their eyes met, and Livia flushed, quickly turning away, her cheeks still glowing with that unfamiliar thrill. Evelyn came in last, quietly wiping down the table. She stood so close to Dylan that the soft scent of a woman's skin reached him with every breath. For the first time in many months, Evelyn felt someone noticing her not out of duty, but because of something deeper, something she herself could not quite name. For a fleeting instant, Dylan caught her eyes lingering on his wrist, her hand touching his shoulder lightly, then withdrawing as quickly as a sigh. Night fell, and the house shrank to the sound of falling rain and the weight of heavy breaths. Dylan sat by his bedroom window, gazing out at the bougainvillea swaying in the storm. In the room next door, faint music played, Livia's soft laughter drifting through the thin walls. He imagined the young woman curled up under her blanket, bare legs raised playfully, and smiled quietly to himself. It had been a long time since his heart had raced for something so simple. 1 in the morning. Dylan lay restless in bed, unable to sleep. He heard the lightest footsteps in the hall. Opening his door quietly, he found Evelyn standing there, hair loose, a cream nightdress hugging every line of her body. She hesitated, still awake. "Just not used to a new bed yet," Dylan replied, his smile gentle, subdued. Evelyn leaned against the wall, her breath floating softly in the dark. She looked at him for a long time, then whispered, "I'm a night owl. This house is used to late hours. I hope you don't mind." Dylan shook his head. For a moment, they stood so close. A single step would have dissolved all distance. But Evelyn turned away swiftly, leaving only a hint of vanilla and words unsaid in the air. Behind him, Livia's door opened with a soft click. The young woman stepped out into the hall, hair flowing, thin nightgown barely clinging to her frame, eyes shining in the shadows. She said nothing, just stared at Dylan in silence, then slipped back into her room, her walk as fluid as water. The next morning, the atmosphere felt thick, heavy with something unnamed. Dylan rose early and went down to the kitchen to make coffee. Evelyn was already there, dressed in tight workout clothes, stretching by the window. Her yoga poses made every toned curve, every strong, womanly line of her body stand out. A narrow waist, full hips, long, athletic legs. Dylan swallowed hard, forcing his eyes elsewhere. Livia ambled in, holding a glass of orange juice, curling her legs up on a chair, eyes glued to her phone but her head tipped toward Dylan, her hair tumbling over one pale shoulder. She asked without looking up, "Did you sleep well?" "It was fine. The air here feels nice." Livia smiled faintly, eyes glinting with mischief. "We're used to having guests, but it's been ages since anyone slept upstairs." Breakfast passed in a swirl of casual talk. Dylan shared a few stories from job sites. Evelyn asked about his eating habits. Livia asked about the city he'd left, then suddenly remarked on the scar on his wrist. Dylan stiffened a little, then smiled it off, evading the question. But Evelyn noticed, her gaze memorizing every small movement he made. That afternoon, Dylan helped Evelyn fix a jammed cabinet. She bent close to the floor, her hair brushing his arm, her breath warm on his cheek. Every now and then, their eyes met up close, as if even a brush of skin would set loose something hidden. Each movement, each touch, left a streak of heat on his flesh. Livia usually came home early from class, pretending to wander past wherever Dylan was working, her sweet shower sent lingering, bare feet gliding across the cool tile. Once, she stood beside him in the kitchen, pretending to reach for a jar on the top shelf, her shirt slipping to bare her collarbone and delicate shoulder. Dylan jerked his hand away, brushing Livia's wrist, their breaths mingling for one charged instant. Livia didn't flinch, just looked up, lips slightly parted, almost an invitation. But Dylan quickly turned away, his heartbeat stumbling. The second night, rain poured down again. The three of them watched a movie on the couch, Livia curled up close to Dylan, Evelyn on the other side, her gaze flicking over every so often. The blue light flickered on their skin, laughter and heavy breaths mingling, soft accidental touches that everyone knew were anything but accidental. During a particularly steamy scene, Livia let out a faint moan, clutching a pillow tight, her eyes flicking to Dylan, cheeks flushed. When the movie ended, Evelyn stood to clear the dishes, Livia slipped quietly upstairs. Dylan stayed, his chest tight, everything suddenly too real, too close. He realized he was slowly becoming an inseparable part of this home. A guest, yes, but also a secret both mother and daughter wanted to keep for themselves. That night, Dylan lay awake again. The sound of water in the bathroom mixed with the rain on the roof. He pictured Evelyn beneath the hot spray, her sun-bronzed skin gleaming in the light, bare shoulders slick and warm, breath heavy as in a private dream. Then Livia's door opened. She stepped into the hall, paused a long moment outside Dylan's door, then slipped away, leaving a lingering trace of jasmine. In those first days at number 43, an unstoppable journey had begun. A place where the lines between guest and family began to blur, and every feeling slowly slipped beyond control. Cold winds swept in, and on the fourth night since Dylan moved into that house, the first big storm of the season arrived. Lightning flashed repeatedly beyond the windows, turning every object in the house into a trembling, distorted shadow under the flicker of stormlight. Suddenly, the power went out, leaving only the faint, blurry glow of a single candle on the dining table, painting the silhouettes of the three inhabitants on the wall like lost spirits. Evelyn fussed with the circuit in the kitchen, a bead of sweat running down her neck despite the chill outside. Dylan followed her with a flashlight, the dim beam sliding down the curve of her back as she bent to check the socket. Her thin shirt clung to her skin, the hem lifting to reveal half a hip, sun-bronzed flesh prickling with both cold and anticipation. Dylan stood right behind her, his breath ghosting across the back of her neck, making her shiver in spite of herself. "Probably just a blown fuse," Dylan murmured, his voice low and rough with sleep. His hand landed on Evelyn's shoulder, the touch light but lingering, as if he left an invisible mark. Evelyn looked up at him, searching for something in those angular features, and slowly stood, the distance between them shrinking to a single breath. Livia, wrapped in a thin blanket, bare feet gliding silently over the tile, entered with hair still damp from her shower. She paused in the kitchen doorway, hesitating, then stepped in, her eyes wide and luminous in the candlelight, studying the two adults with a blend of curiosity and challenge. Evelyn quickly pulled away from Dylan, adjusting her robe, but couldn't hide the flush on her cheeks. "Power's still out, Mom?" Livia asked, her voice small, as if afraid to shatter the thick air. "Maybe tomorrow. Tonight we'll just have to camp out together in the living room," Evelyn replied, working to sound natural. They spread blankets and bedding right on the living room floor, near the old fireplace that hadn't been used in years. Dylan lay in the middle, Evelyn on one side, Livia on the other. Each clung to their own pillow, but no one slept. The closed space filled with the scents of bodies, sweet candle wax, and the last traces of red wine. Whenever anyone shifted, the covers stretched tight, exposing a patch of skin in the trembling candlelight. Evelyn poured red wine into 3 small glasses, her hand shaking so a few drops splashed onto the old rug. She handed Dylan his glass, her eyes lingering on his lips before they touched the rim. Dylan sipped, the sharp tang of alcohol burning his throat and stirring his breath. Livia watched, her gaze a blend of innocence and womanhood, envy and yearning swirling in her eyes and thickening the air. She drained her glass in one go, then curled up close to Dylan, her small hand unconsciously resting on the muscle of his arm. "Are you afraid of ghosts here?" Livia whispered, her breath warm against Dylan's ear, her smile half teasing, half inviting. "Ghosts are probably easier to handle than women," Dylan replied softly, glancing at Evelyn. The line hung between them, making all 3 fall silent until Evelyn laughed, a low, rough sound with a trace of jealousy and deep loneliness. No one spoke again, only the drum of rain on the porch, the ticking clock, filled the room. Near 3 in the morning, Livia shifted, her arm brushing Dylan's chest. He felt the heat from her young skin, the scent of shower gel blending with the faintest hint of fresh sweat. Livia's bare legs tangled with his beneath the covers, her small hand pressed to his stomach, nails tracing light, absent-minded patterns on his skin. Dylan froze, barely daring to breathe, his whole body heating up. Livia parted her lips, breathing out a soft sound, then snuggled closer, her hair spilling over his neck like wet silk. On his other side, Evelyn lay awake, staring up at the ceiling. She was aware of everything, every sharp breath, every subtle shift of the blanket. Her hand gripped the sheet tight, then slipped quietly down between her thighs, seeking warmth in the cold dark. She inhaled deeply, closing her eyes, surrendering to secret thoughts in the shadows. She could feel Dylan's heartbeat through the bed, the tiniest motions of two bodies so close. No one spoke, only breathing, only the faintest moans threading quietly through the night. That night, all three tossed until dawn, each of them lost in their own world of desire and silent hunger. Livia secretly touched Dylan's chest, her slender fingers sliding lightly, then retreating as if afraid of being seen. Dylan closed his eyes, trying to hold himself back, but his body betrayed him, thighs tensing, breath coming faster. Evelyn quietly slipped from the blankets and into the bathroom, the sound of running water echoing like a siren song back to the two left behind. The next morning, the rain had eased, but the house felt even heavier. Evelyn wore an oversized white shirt, only 2 buttons fastened, the collar askew, her tanned shoulders exposed. Dylan watched her each time she passed, his eyes glued to her skin, to every smooth, effortless movement of a grown woman's body. Livia sat at the table, swirling her coffee, glancing at Dylan and then at her mother, every look a hidden spark burning quietly beneath a calm face. They spoke less, but every action carried double meaning. Evelyn peeled an apple for Dylan, her fingers skilled but trembling, letting her hand linger on his longer than necessary. Dylan felt the warmth of a woman's touch, calloused from life, yet full of gentle longing. Livia pretended to sulk, using the excuse of making a mess with milk so she could pull up her shirt and wipe herself, exposing a flat stomach and a glimpse of delicate underwear. Dylan turned away quickly, but the image stuck in his mind for the rest of the morning. That afternoon, Livia asked Dylan to help fix the leaky awning out on the porch. The rain had stopped, but the air was sharp and cold. Livia climbed the stepladder, her old shorts riding up to reveal toned thighs and smooth skin. Dylan stood below, unable to hide his appreciation, his hands automatically steadying her waist to keep her from slipping. Livia glanced back, her breath tickling his cheek, and whispered, "You're really strong." Just then, Evelyn appeared in the window, her eyes locking onto the two of them. She said nothing, but one look changed everything. That night, the three ate dinner in silence, no one mentioning the scene on the porch, but the tension was thicker than ever. The sound of silverware clinking against plates sharp as a warning. Night fell again, and Dylan lay in bed, hands behind his head, unable to close his eyes. The wind howled through the cracks in the window, water dripped steadily into the kitchen sink, footsteps padded lightly in the hallway. He sat up, cracked his door, and found Evelyn sitting on the stairs, hugging a pillow, hair falling over half her face. She looked up, eyes shining with tears, lips trembling. Dylan approached, about to speak when Evelyn suddenly leaned her head on his shoulder, the scent of vanilla and fresh rain rising from her skin. "Do you ever," she whispered, "feel lost here?" Dylan squeezed her shoulders tight, feeling the heat of her body through his t-shirt. They sat close for a long time, neither speaking, only the sound of heavy breathing and pounding hearts filling the darkness. Behind them, Livia's shadow moved behind a crack in her door, eyes wide as if witnessing everything. But she quietly shut herself in, taking her private dreams with her. The little house had become a maze of emotion. With every passing night, the boundaries between guest and family, between right and forbidden, blurred further, leaving nothing but unnamed longing, these endless, sleepless nights. It was a quiet Sunday morning in the sleepy suburbs of the East Coast. Pale autumn sunlight filtered through heavy curtains, casting streaks across the wooden hallway of number 43. Dylan had just finished his shower, a large towel slung low around his waist, beads of water still clinging to his broad shoulders and chest, his sandy hair damp and hanging over his brow. As he stepped out of the shared bathroom, he walked straight into the open, lingering gaze of Evelyn. She stood at the end of the hallway, a mug of steaming coffee in her hand. For a split second, she froze, her eyes tracing the faint scar on his chest, sliding over the curve of his hips and lingering at his waist. Only a few seconds passed, but the tension felt endless. Evelyn pressed her lips together, then pretended to look away. But the aroma of coffee couldn't mask the subtle, waking heat of a woman that Dylan felt deep in his nerves. Livia appeared at the top of the stairs, her long hair loosely tied, wearing an oversized tee and shorts, bare feet on the hardwood. The young woman paused, round eyes wide as she stared at Dylan's damp, bare chest. In the muted morning light, every line of his body was visible. Fit, masculine, yet there was a vulnerable uncertainty beneath. Livia managed a shy smile, cheeks flushed, then slipped past Dylan, but as she did, she let her hair graze his chest, a faint scent of green apple shampoo lingering, a secret caress in passing. Brunch that day, Dylan found himself caught between two burning stares. Evelyn, composed but unable to hide her deep longing, made Dylan's coffee, her hand brushing his and lingering longer than necessary. Livia, meanwhile, wore a thin camisole, lounging cross-legged on the chair, letting her gaze drift, accidentally, to Dylan's waist and chest every time he reached for something. Evelyn mentioned she needed groceries and asked Dylan for a ride since her car was in the shop. Livia, suddenly eager, wanted to tag along, said she needed to stop by the bookstore. All three piled into Dylan's old SUV. Evelyn sat up front, Livia in the back, but she often leaned forward, her hand resting lightly on Dylan's shoulder, chatting about directions or teasing him about his dad driving style. Every red light, Dylan felt Evelyn's eyes on him, partly controlling, partly craving. The crisp autumn air flowed in through the cracked window, carrying the scent of maple leaves, blending with Evelyn's subtle perfume, Livia's fresh shampoo, and the faint musk of Dylan's just-showered skin. At the supermarket, Evelyn picked out produce while Dylan carried the heavy bags, the two walking close, their hands brushing each other as they passed the baskets back and forth. In the frozen foods aisle, Evelyn suddenly slipped on a wet patch. Dylan caught her, her whole body crashing into his, chest to chest, her breath hot against his neck. For a heartbeat, they froze, eyes locked, their faces only inches apart. Evelyn giggled nervously, but her hand stayed on his shoulder for a few seconds longer. Livia, trailing behind with a stack of books, watched every adult movement with intent. She chose a separate checkout, stepping outside first on purpose. When Dylan came out, she intercepted him, her voice low and teasing. "You're strong, aren't you? If you stay here much longer, I'll have to hit the gym just to keep up." Back home, the sun was fading. Dylan was busy stacking groceries in the fridge when Livia sidled up behind him, circling her arms loosely around his waist, pressing her small hand against his side. "You're taller than both me and Mom. Standing next to you makes me feel so little," she said, part innocent, part challenge, making Dylan shiver. He tried to act nonchalant, stepping away, but Livia stayed close, her shining eyes locked boldly on his, not backing down for a moment. By late afternoon, Livia asked Dylan to help fix her bookshelf. As Dylan knelt to tighten the screws, Livia sprawled on the floor, legs folded, letting her nightdress ride up, exposing smooth, pale skin right in front of him. While Dylan fiddled with the screwdriver, Livia leaned closer, her hair brushing his shoulder, her breath warm against his cheek. The scent of her shower and youthful hormones making Dylan's head spin. As she whispered, "If I go away for college, will you miss me?" Dylan stiffened, searching her eyes, something primal stirring deep inside. But before he could answer, Evelyn's voice called up from downstairs. "Dylan, could you help me open this jar?" Heart pounding, Dylan left Livia's room, still rattled. In the kitchen, he found Evelyn wrestling with a stubborn glass jar, her slender hands trembling. Dylan gently covered her hands with his, twisted hard, and the lid popped off, some sauce splattering onto her wrist. Evelyn looked at him, a shy smile trembling on her lips. "Sometimes, I forget what it's like to have a real man in the house." The kitchen heated with a new tension. The golden light of sunset catching on Evelyn's skin, her brown hair tumbling over her shoulders. Dylan reached out, slowly wiping the sauce from her wrist, a motion that felt like a confession, soft and deliberate. Evelyn gazed at him for a long moment, not looking away, their breaths mingling, a small, sweet ache flaring between their hands and eyes. That night, the three gathered on the living room sofa for a movie. Evelyn picked a romantic American film, full of blurred, sensual love scenes. Livia curled up with her head in Dylan's lap, knees drawn up against his hip, while Evelyn sat pressed against his other side, head on his shoulder whenever the film got emotional. After a while, Livia pretended to fall asleep, but her hand drifted to Dylan's thigh, tracing slow circles through his sweatpants. Evelyn noticed and edged closer, her hand gripping Dylan's arm, fingers tightening in a silent claim. The air was thick, tension rising like a fog. Dylan could feel every breath, every touch, every look, like the whole room was a web of desire, and he was helplessly tangled at its center. Past midnight, Dylan crept to the kitchen for water, only to find Evelyn standing there in a sheer nightgown, hair loose around her bare shoulders, the dim golden light highlighting every curve. Evelyn turned, eyes luminous, lips trembling with something unsaid. Dylan stepped closer, close enough that their breaths mingled, the world holding still for a single pounding heartbeat. But at that exact moment, footsteps echoed from the stairs. Livia appeared, wrapped in only a towel, droplets of water glistening on her skin. The three locked eyes, each gaze holding a separate secret. That night, none of them slept, each tangled in dreams haunted by the images, the breath, and the presence of the others. Autumn in a small American town always felt colder than anyone expected, especially when the rain wouldn't stop for 3 days straight. The sky hung in a misty gray shroud, and the maples in the garden blazed with deep red and gold. On Saturday afternoon, the house at number 43 was heavy with humidity. The air filled with the constant whine of wind sneaking through old window frames, making the whole space at once warm and strangely stifling. It had been pouring since dawn. Rainwater flooded the front steps, leaking down through the kitchen ceiling and dripping steadily onto the gleaming wood floor. Evelyn rushed around with towels, mopping frantically, but couldn't keep up with the growing stain above. Dylan came down from upstairs, his gray t-shirt soaked and clinging to his hard body, hair dripping onto his forehead, his blue eyes bright in the dim light. "Let me try," Dylan said, his voice deep and rough, quickly climbing up on a chair to check the ceiling. Evelyn stood close below, head tilted to watch him, her eyes shining with something equal parts worry and admiration. Dylan stretched up, muscles rippling under the thin, wet shirt, the hem riding up to reveal taut, sculpted abs. Every movement drew Evelyn's gaze. For her, the world shrank to the sound of breath and the mingled scent of male skin and cold rain. Suddenly, Dylan's hand slipped on the wet ceiling. His tall frame lost balance and crashed down. Evelyn lunged forward and they fell together, landing in a tangled heap right on the kitchen rug. For a moment, there was no space between them, only breath, skin, and pounding heartbeats. Dylan braced himself on one arm, the other gripping Evelyn's waist. Their eyes found each other, so close that every hot breath was felt on the other's cheek. Evelyn shivered, clutching his shoulder, her lips parting as if to say something, but there was no time. Dylan leaned in, his mouth capturing hers, soft and hungry, desperate and full of need. Evelyn responded instantly, her whole body melting in his arms, the kiss long and deep, flavored with red wine and the tears of joy and guilt tangled together. Their bodies wrapped around each other on the cold floor, fingers skimming bare skin, frantic, starving after endless lonely months. Evelyn gasped softly as Dylan's hand slid under her shirt, exploring places untouched for years. Outside, the rain's drumming mixed with their rapid breaths, the tiny moans, and the sound of hungry kisses echoing through the warm kitchen. Upstairs, Livia froze on the landing, hands gripping the banister as the sounds drifted up. Soft thuds, ragged breaths, muffled cries, and the broken shout of a name in the storm. She bit her lip, her eyes swimming, a sharp burn of jealousy, pain, and desire rising all at once, tangled with a hazy arousal she couldn't control. She fled to her room, collapsing onto her bed, her legs trembling, hand pressed to the feverish heat of her belly. Eyes closed, she imagined Dylan's arms tight around her, whispering her name just as he had whispered to her mother. The noises from downstairs urged her on, waves of want surging inside her for the first time. Livia gave in, letting feeling and body take over, fingers slipping lower, muffled moans lost in her pillow, blending with the rain and the forbidden union happening below. In the kitchen, Evelyn and Dylan had lost all sense of boundaries. When the kiss finally broke, Evelyn let her head fall onto Dylan's chest, her damp brown hair sticking to his heated skin. They panted, eyes locked, both knowing nothing would ever be the same again. Evelyn whispered, voice breaking with a trembling joy, "I've waited so long." Dylan didn't answer, just held her tighter, his mouth on her neck, her shoulder, branding hot marks on skin that had long been forgotten. They clung to each other on the floor, not caring about the open window, the storm, or anything beyond body, breath, and the desperate hunger to be held. Only when their strength was spent did they pull apart, holding each other's gaze in a long, stunned silence. Evelyn pulled her shirt up over her bare shoulder, and Dylan slowly got to his feet, his hand still locked in hers. In that instant, a figure appeared at the end of the stairs. Livia stood there, her face blurred by shadow, lips swollen, eyes wet but burning with something fierce and hurt. She said nothing, just stared at Dylan for a long, aching moment, then turned away, her bare footsteps echoing across the cold floorboards. Dylan and Evelyn were left frozen, both realizing the storm of forbidden longing had swept all three of them into a maze with no exit. That night, the house felt like a glass cage. Breath, moans, crying, and silent tears all swirling together in the endless rain. None of them slept. Each retreated into their own world, Evelyn trembling between joy, fear, and guilt. Dylan dazed, elated, confused. Livia torn between pain and desire, her heart a storm of longing for the man who was now neither a stranger nor truly anyone's to claim. In the days after that rainy night, the air inside the little house seemed to thicken, as if every wall, every thread of fabric on the sofa, had absorbed the scent of secrecy. Evelyn and Dylan tried to act normal in front of Livia, but between them was a constant current. Furtive glances, fleeting touches, hands brushing together in the kitchen or hallway when no one was watching. Whenever Livia was out, Evelyn would slip quietly into Dylan's room. At first, it was just long embraces, lingering kisses, but soon all boundaries dissolved in hurried, breathless nights, moans stifled in the dark. Every night after Livia went upstairs, Evelyn would come to him, bare feet gliding softly over the carpet, her nightdress as thin as mist. The door barely closed, Dylan waiting shirtless on the bed under the warm yellow glow of the lamp. They would fall into each other like the desperately thirsty, mouths pressed tight in longing, hands clutching so hard it left marks. On the thick comforter, warmth spreading out beneath them, whispers tangled with heavy breathing, the two of them swept away by a forbidden storm they could never resist. For Evelyn, Dylan was not just physical pleasure, but a deep solace for a woman who had lost her way. In his arms, she trembled, sometimes weeping with joy, sometimes with guilt, but always curling into his chest when the secret passion finally ebbed. After those stolen nights, she would nestle against his neck, inhaling his scent, whispering confessions only for those who had lost control for real. They thought they had hidden everything well, but Livia was not as innocent as they believed. Since witnessing her mother and Dylan together, Livia changed completely. She spent more time at home, making excuses to skip evening classes so she could cook, watch TV with Dylan, or hover near his room when Evelyn wasn't around. One Friday night, Livia chose a new nightgown, a thin satin slip, bare-shouldered and backless, only just covering her youthful curves. She sat right next to Dylan on the sofa, bare feet draped over his thigh, smiling as she asked, "Do you like comedies or romance movies more?" Without waiting for a reply, she played a romance film, the living room filling with soft moans and intimate scenes. She rested her head on Dylan's shoulder, her hand slipping down to squeeze his, unashamed of her boldness. "Are you cold? It gets chilly here at night in the fall," she whispered, her breath hot on his neck. Dylan tried to keep his composure, but his body betrayed him. Every touch from Livia set his nerves alight, his heart thudding out of control, hand tightening unconsciously on her slim, bare foot. Evelyn appeared in the kitchen doorway, eyes icy but with a faint smile before she turned away. Dylan felt the sparks beginning to ignite among all three of them, and that night he lay awake, listening to Livia's footsteps sneaking along the hall, the trickle of water in the bathroom, the sweet, secret whispers that buzzed like honey in the dark. One weekend night, long after everyone was supposed to be asleep, Dylan still couldn't rest. He reached for a book when the door creaked open. Livia appeared, hair tumbling loose, her short slip revealing almost all of her smooth white legs, lips flushed, eyes bright in the darkness. She walked to him, sitting at the edge of his bed, her hand pressed to his chest, feeling the heavy beat of his heart through hot skin. "Can't sleep," she whispered, her eyes fixed on his lips, one hand tucking her hair behind her ear to bare her slim neck and sharp collarbone. "You know, ever since you came here, everything changed. Livia murmured, her mouth almost touching his. Dylan tried to lean away, but Livia didn't give him the chance. She pressed closer, kissing his neck, her breath hot, soft lips sliding along his jaw, leaving a wet trail on his skin. Her hand explored his shoulder, tracing down over his stomach. Dylan fought himself, Evelyn's face in his mind, but his body was swept away in the wild tide of Livia's youth. Livia leaned up to whisper in his ear, "Just once, tonight, I don't want to be left behind, not after Mom." Dylan couldn't resist any longer. He pulled her into his arms, gripping her slender waist, his mouth finding hers. They kissed, feverish, the heat breaking loose beneath the covers. Moans, ragged breaths, wandering hands, like a small, private storm shared by just two people. Livia's body trembled and melted in his grasp, becoming a woman for the first time in the house she'd once thought belonged only to mother and daughter. That night was more than just sex. It was a tornado of longing denied for too long. After, Livia lay against Dylan's chest, tears streaming down her cheeks but a smile playing at her lips, while Dylan drifted in a maze of guilt, satisfaction, and a dawning dread at how far he had crossed the line. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Evelyn watched as Livia emerged from Dylan's room, her nightgown slipping off one shoulder, eyes shining with a new, defiant light. Between the three of them, secrets began to unravel, leaving only a suffocating tension, a world where a single spark might set the whole place ablaze. The last days of October brought colder air and a steady drizzle that lasted all week. The yard at number 43 was littered with maple leaves, the grass soaked, the sky perpetually gray. Inside, the atmosphere had grown so thick it felt suffocating. Every glance, every footstep, every touch charged with unspoken tension. Evelyn was quieter than ever, her eyes shadowed, lips bitten whenever Livia brushed past or Dylan's hand grazed her shoulder in the kitchen. Dylan felt trapped in a maze, tormented by the touches of two women, one seasoned and aching, the other young and ablaze, each tearing at his body and mind in turns, day and night. Livia, meanwhile, had become someone new. She no longer hid, she provoked. At dinner, she sat close to Dylan, laughing loudly, sometimes slipping her hand onto his thigh beneath the table, sometimes pressing her chest against his back while reaching for dessert. Evelyn saw it all, jealousy flaring in her eyes, but she only poured more wine, sometimes tossing out a biting remark that sliced through the air, thick with the scent of lust. The breaking point came on a weekend night. Rain still tapped at the eaves, the living room lamp casting a dull golden haze over the three of them. Dinner ended early. Evelyn opened another bottle of wine, filling her glass to the brim, draining it in long, silent gulps. Livia sprawled across the sofa, bare legs draped over the arm, her nightgown barely covering her thighs. Dylan sat between them, chest tight, hands trembling. He didn't know if it was from the cold or from what was about to happen. No one spoke. Evelyn was the first to break the silence. "Maybe tonight we need to be honest with each other." She looked straight at Dylan, then at Livia, her eyes shining with tears but fierce with resolve and a quiet desperation. Livia gave a cold smile, moving closer to her mother, one arm looping around Dylan as if staking her claim. "Why don't you just ask? What do you want from him, Mom?" Evelyn laughed, a brittle, bitter sound echoing through the room. "Maybe what I want is what we both want. Isn't that right, Dylan?" Her eyes never left him, her voice low and rough, pained and hungry. Dylan stared at the two women before him, heart hammering, breath uneven. He knew he'd broken every boundary, there was no turning back. Every feeling, every blurred night, every secret touch had blazed into a fire that now threatened to consume them all. Livia stood up, circling the room, then dropped down in front of Dylan, her hands on his knees, eyes burning. "Tell us, who do you want?" Her question was a challenge, a demand, a final test. Evelyn edged closer too, sitting right beside Dylan, one hand on his neck, her fingers tracing his jaw, her smile trembling between tears and desire. "You can't have us both, Dylan." Her voice broke, but her eyes stayed locked on his lips. The room was thick with the scent of wine, hormones, heated skin. Dylan's judgment dissolved, every sense melting. His hand circled Evelyn's waist, his mouth found hers, then suddenly Livia pulled him back. Her young lips pressed to his neck, her breath burning against his skin. All three tangled together on the sofa, every last boundary gone. Moans spilled out between hungry kisses, greedy hands exploring every inch, every touch a mark, every moment a new storm. Tears slid down Evelyn's cheeks, blending with Livia's shaky laughter and Dylan's ragged gasps. For that moment, they were no longer mother and daughter, just three bodies entwined, unable to stop, unable to turn back. The room filled with the scent of sex, bodies colliding to the rhythm of rain. The lamp dimmed, leaving nothing but shadows merging on the old upholstery. Every touch was an apology, every gasp a secret plea, every sigh a desperate ache after too many lonely years wanting to be touched, to be loved completely. After that storm of bodies, Evelyn slumped against the couch, hair tangled, eyes red, hand trembling as she wiped away her tears. Livia nestled against Dylan's shoulder, a faint smile on her lips but her eyes still wet. Dylan looked at them both and knew everything had changed for good. He was no longer a guest, nor a tenant, nor anything that fit the word family. That night nothing else was said. The rain kept falling, but the house was transformed. Every secret, every dream, every deepest longing had been exposed. Beneath the sheets, on the sofa, in every breath and every silent tear of three people for whom there was no way back. And the story ends there, where all boundaries have burned away, where forbidden love scorches to the very core of regret and obsession, and where each of them understands. One night was all it took for none of them to ever be the same again.